Microsoft has a really good one that they use internally. It's called the Who Is, or the Who Bot. And it allows us to go say, like, who is Todd Clint? And it writes back, and it's like going, oh, we know who that guy is. He loves the Raiders. So that would be fun.
He knows
So
nothing
easy.
about PowerShell.
So easy to sit there and do.
Todd is going to come in, but he will be a few minutes late, so we'll get going. Today is April 19th, 2023, and we are in when out of the box isn't enough, but this is really the devs take over. And so we have a new Meet the Team, and Emily is not here to judge, so I went all in, and how ugly can I make this thing? So instead of Mark Anderson today, playing the role of, is Andrew Connell, who is a friend of Simpraxis's. His business is Voitanos, and he does training, videos, and solutions on the SharePoint framework and development in general. And there's some links in our resources slide for finding more about him. We also have friend of Simpraxis and my right and left hand, Stefan Bauer is with us also today. He's the design expert. His organization is N8D. He's out of Vienna, Austria, and he is also joining us today. Todd will be here a little bit late, and you have Derek and I as well. So we are a big dev team. All right, so our agenda today, this is a Power Platform and PowerShell free zone. And note, Todd is not here. He has left the building. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about the when and why you should extend out of the box. So we'll start there. And then we're going to go through from a SharePoint and a Teams perspective, where are the extensibility points in the products so that we can sort of address business scenarios that might fit into those locations. And so as always, if you have any questions or comments or whatever, you can use the raise hand feature, you can come off mute, you can put things in the chat, and we'll address them. And Stefan is going to sort of wrap that extensibility story up with some design ideas or tips so that you can think about design when you're building those extensibility solutions. All right, Derek, do you want to kick us off and sort of talk about that?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, you have a pretty captive audience here today. We're all developers in one way, shape, or form on the panel today. And a lot of times that leads to the old hammer and nail analogy. If all you've got is a hammer, everything is a nail. But when it comes to whether or not you should or shouldn't write custom code, as a general rule, at least I always try to follow this sort of methodology. First of all, you need your business requirements, you need your outcomes. What problem are you trying to solve? And without understanding that, you really can't make any sort of decisions about whether to write code or not. The next step I usually try to take is making sure or seeing if you can do something and get 80% of your business requirements met with out-of-the-box functionality. And if you can, then that's the way you should go. If you can't, then what's the next option? The next option I like to sort of guide folks to is sort of, I don't want to say low code because I think that's a loaded term. I like to think of using things like the PnP search web part, or list or column formatting, or leveraging learning pathways. One of those sort of tried and true pieces of technology that help you configure the system to do a little bit more than it would necessarily do out of the box. And again, if you can accomplish 80%, then don't code. It's that next script editor web part does not count. And then finally, if you've tried both of those things, then that's the time to fire up Visual Studio Code or try to build a custom dev solution. And the reason for that is really that you want to make sure that you're not incurring some level of technical debt or incurring something that you have to then maintain and update and make sure that it moves along with the rest of your solution that you don't necessarily need to.
I think that's a really good point too, because from a dev perspective, I think one of the big mistakes, Andrew, you and I have talked about this a million times, big mistakes that people make is they think, okay, well, I had a developer build this thing and I'm going to deploy it, and then I don't need to ever talk to that developer again. And granted, you probably shouldn't have to have them redeveloping things if it's built well and architected well. It should be, you know, sort of configurable and extensible and at least a little bit from the get-go, but you do want your devs to do maintenance on those products. And so you don't want to just deploy it and forget it and, you know, 7 years down the line go, I wonder about that thing we deployed, you know, 7 years ago. Like, definitely think to yourself, hey, I'm going to extend this product, but I'm also going to engage my developer for, you know, 8-10 hours, some small amount of time to just make a quick touch point on that code, make sure all the packages are up to date, that everything is sort of as fresh as it can be, and do an updated deployment on it. So that's another thing to keep in mind with that.
And that also will cover security vulnerabilities as well.
Absolutely. That's a really good point, Derek. So this is a very nice building slide, which won't show up on the recording. So the different ways that you can, the different places you can extend the Microsoft 365 platform is around, in general, Teams and SharePoint. And then you have Microsoft Viva, which sort of fits over the top of both of those in the sense that the cards work in Teams as well as on the SharePoint platform. So these are sort of all the places that we can extend the platform. And so let's dive in a little bit and talk about each one of those, where those places are and what you might do with those places. So I'm going to start with discussing the SharePoint platform. So we have what's called web parts, and web parts are also analogous to Teams tabs. So if you build a web part, you also can deploy it as a Teams tab. It can be both. And we also have application pages, which also can be personal apps. And so we'll show you where those land. We then have what's called extensions. So extensions are things like, they call them application customizers. We'll show you where those can show up in the product. We have field customizers, which is like a much more developed version of the JSON field customizers, list formatting, things that you can do. Command sets, which is in a way to add actions into lists and libraries. We'll show you where those come in. And the latest thing to come out is form customizers. This isn't a perfect solution yet, but it's certainly much better than what we had. So I'm really excited to have those form customizers. And then Derek's going to touch on Viva when we get to it. So let's start about web parts. So web parts, we're all used to web parts. When we go to a SharePoint page, using out of the box SharePoint web parts, you know, we put the page in edit mode, we have a section, and then we add web parts from the gallery that exists there. Well, you can also have your own custom web parts built that can have any functionality and any design that you might need, and bring that functionality into the page and mix and match it with other web parts that you already have on the page. So those are a great way to extend the functionality of your platform. And as I sort of said before, not only can it be a web part in a SharePoint page, but it also can be a tab in Team. So these two screenshots, you can see the tab in Team for World Clock. That is a web part. We're just adding it as a tab in a Team. And so we get that same functionality in Teams and in SharePoint for one development experience. Web parts also can be done as sort of a development term is called a SPA, but sort of the idea is a single page app where you have a piece of code that's going to take over the whole page in SharePoint. So Learning Pathways has a couple of these in the system for like the admin area. So this is when you have sort of a whole application. You're really going to interact with the user. And so you want the whole surface of the page or most of the surface of the page. You can use these app part pages and take over the real estate. They can also be deployed as personal apps. And so what that means is instead of being a tab in a team, it actually can be an app that's launched from a button on the left rail of Teams. And so that, again, is where you have a bunch of functionality. And for your users who are in Teams, you literally want them to go to that app and be able to interact with an entire suite of functionality that you surface in that way. Another thing that we can do is what's called application customizers. Now, historically, these so basically what these are little areas, and I've highlighted them in red. There's a bar at the top and there's a bar along the bottom. The bar at the top injects your own custom UI into the space below that SharePoint header, the Office 365 header, and the top of the SharePoint page. So you have that whole panel from left to right, and you can have your own custom user interface in that area. And so this is typically used for things like, well, historically, custom nav is a big one that would end up showing up in here, but also like a global nav solution. Also using, we use it a lot for like a custom header. So if you had like a project site where you had like some sort of central location where like a list where you kept all the metadata about particular projects or whatever, or accounts or clients or whatever it might be, and then you have a site for each one of those, you might want to have a custom header that surfaces some of the information from that list in a way that's really brings that information to the user where they're working. So they're like, oh, hey, what was that client's phone number? Or, you know, what's the status of this project right now? You can surface that information for them right in the user experience right there. And you can certainly make that editable so they can edit the information in that list, but remotely, right from the site where they're doing their work. The footer is a little funky and this is sort of a design thing that I'm not sure how I feel about. Stefan, you may have an opinion, but that footer area at the bottom is sticky. And what I mean by that is whatever UX element that you inject down there just hovers over the rest of the page. And so as you scroll, that just stays there and the page moves up and down underneath it. Yes, Derek,
Yeah.
Stefan always have an opinion.
Yeah, it's not optimal, but we still have in modern pages the same page setup overall like we had in 2007.
Yeah.
That's why it's sticky there. I hope this will change in future because I don't want to see the footer all the time because it doesn't give me any information that I need to have all the time there.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think from a design perspective, it'd be really optimal to try to like minimize how much you do in that footer. Like maybe not the worst thing to have a footer, but like keep it as small as you possibly can so that it doesn't really overlay the page too much and affect users' ability to interact with the page. Okay. Field customizer. So, you know, you can do this with list formatting with the JSON, blobs of JSON that you can put in the field columns, but you can also do it with custom code. And so here's just a quick visualization where I did a field customizer for a favorite count, but I added an icon that's actually a button. And so you can click on that icon, the little star icon, it fills itself in and it's writing some data behind the scenes to store what your favorites are in a file in some location or whatever you might want to do. But you can create significantly more complicated user interactions with fields when you write your own custom field customizers using the SharePoint framework. Another thing you can do is command sets. And so this is the ability for in lists and libraries to be able to add custom buttons into either the command bar at the top of the list or library or in the action menu that shows up when you, so if you're familiar with like a list, there's always like the title or the name field has the ... which opens up this menu and you can add your own custom items in there. The items also, the commands that show up can also be limited to if there's no item selected in the list, if there's one item selected in the list, or if there's multiple items selected in the list. The commands that show up can change and thereby obviously have their own separate functionality. So if you have like a thing that you want to be able to do against, like, let's say a document, you want to be able to, I'm just going to make this up as I go along, but like, hey, when somebody selects an item, I want to have a button that shows up that says convert PDF and email it to HR. And so you could have a button that did that behind the scenes with, you know, some amount of code, and then that functionality would happen. So these are things where, hey, I want to be able to have this extra functionality in a document library to solve some business process around documents or list items. That can be a really great way to do that. Okay. And form customizers, these are awesome. This was something we've been wanting forever. We got Power Platform, so Power Apps could customize a list form, but we weren't able to do it with the SharePoint framework until AC, what, 1.13, right? it doesn't really matter. Nobody cares. I just realized.
About a
But
year
at any
ago.
rate, it's
Year and a
yeah,
half.
it's about a year ago. So it's fairly recent, but the ability to create a custom form over the top of a list or a list item is really, really powerful. Being able to create your own user experience for that, lookups, related fields, drop downs, all that kind of customization can be really powerful. And we've done a fair number of those so far. So those are also some very cool ways that we can augment the experience in SharePoint. Derek, Viva.
Oh, it's my
What
turn
do
to
we
talk
do?
about Viva. All right.
It is.
So right now, we only, from a custom code perspective, we really only have one extension point into Viva. And I say that sort of with quotes around it because there's really not any special endpoint that you can access. You can't access topics or any of that information. It's really just because it's part of the Viva desktop or the Viva home suite. They are called adaptive card extensions, or ACEs. And they're meant to be interactive with the user. They're meant to be quick hits to quick access to things that users really need to see. It's really designed to be mobile first. And so it's mobile friendly. It shows up, Julie, if you want to hit next. It's part of the Teams dashboard when you use Teams on mobile. And so this is an example of what that looks like. These are a bunch of different ACEs, and each one of those ACEs sort of has a different set of functionality. You can also, in using SPFx, you can integrate with any sort of data source that you want to. You can read and write data from anywhere that has an API. Obviously using the SharePoint framework and PMPJS, you can use SharePoint, you can access Teams. Julie showed the world clock earlier. We wrote a corresponding Teams app, a corresponding adaptive card extension that went with it. So you can use the same type of functionality across multiple different pieces of, multiple different tools. You want to hit next again. Here's an example of one. This is much more informational. So this one shows a cafeteria. It's got some tabs. One of the things that this does is this uses for the front end, it uses the adaptive card framework for the layout. And that's what helps make it mobile friendly and cross-device friendly. It uses SPFx on the back end for the data layer, or for the logic behind it. Once more. So you can also use it to do things that are interactive, like registration. So think an event registration form, or maybe a visitor registration application. You can put that on your dashboard, and then users can access it and add visitor registrations right then and there. Or put this on a page and have a kiosk that has that ACE on there right there.
Cool. So let's move on then to sort of the other side of the coin. And Andrew's going to talk to us about extending the Teams platform, which kind of has some of both of what we've already talked about, but different ways to do it. So let me move forward a slide.
Cool. Thanks, Julie. So the first one we don't really have a slide for, but on the last slide you saw we had 4 things listed, and one of them was tabs. I wasn't going to talk too much about it here because Julie already kind of went into it when she talked about web parts. But from a developer's point of view, we can put anything we want inside of a tab, because all it really is just a UI container to an iframe. So that means we can point to any web page for the most part. We can point to pages that host a web part. But anything that we want to put in there is like a web app. It's a great place for us to, when we want to build a full-blown like application inside of Teams, a tab is a great way to do that. So you could build, as a developer, you could use React Angular to build a spa and then host it inside of a tab. The other options we have are they're really, in my opinion, they're really poorly named features. So I've put some of my own names in here. So like, for example, the Microsoft Teams group likes to call these things task modules, but nobody outside of the Teams world knows what that thing is. It's basically how we do dialogues inside of Teams. And so what these task modules will allow us to do is effectively just do exactly what a dialogue does. We can pop it up and we can display something, or we can chain these things together to create an experience to where it's almost like a wizardish kind of experience. When you take something like that and you chain it together with like adaptive cards, You can create a really good data collection vehicle. And I'm going to talk about in a second about how you can actually use these in conjunction with something like a bot to create a really good experience to solve a challenge we run into a lot with bots. So those are two things we got there. So we got tabs, got that checked off, got task modules or dialogues, that's checked off. The third type of extensibility model that we have is a conversational bot. Now, I'm not using the word bot there. I'm using the term conversational bot because there's technically, I think it's 3 different types of bots that we can do inside of Teams. One is an online media bot. One is a calling bot. Yeah, one is an online media bot. One is a calling bot, and one is a conversational bot. So the online media one and the calling bot, those are going to come into play with like video-based or audio-based streams. So like when somebody calls in, you have Teams set up with telephony to do like the automated assistant. That's a bot listening to that and figuring out, oh, they pushed 2, or they push 0 like 10 times because they can't get through to a real person. The other option they have there is an online media bot. And what that does is we could have that hooked up to our meeting here, and it could process the video and the audio streams from this meeting to flag something and put it in the chat, or Andrew said another word that he's not allowed to say. So we could have that kind of like the Andrew bot.
An HR alert is what you're basically saying. We could have
we call those the Andrew. We usually call those the Andrew bots. So the other thing that we have though is the conversational bot, and this is the only thing that this really is it's more of a way for us to have like an automated conversation via text or via an adaptive card type interface, like a form-based interface with the bot. Now, these can live in 2 different scenarios. These can live in a scenario where it's just a one-on-one. So where I need to book a hotel, or I need to go like get something solved with a, actually, Microsoft has a really good one that they use internally. It's called the Who Is, or the Who Bot. And it allows us to go say like, who is Todd Clint? And it writes back and it's like going, oh, we know who that guy is. He loves the Raiders. So, that would be fun.
He knows nothing about PowerShell.
so easy to sit there and do. I didn't mean the Raiders. Sorry. I'm sorry. I meant the Chargers. So, and there you go. So the other one of the things that we can do is it was just too easy, Todd.
It is.
So what we can do with this though is that you can have a one-on-one conversation with the bot, or you can have a conversation with the bot like in a group chat or a whole channel-based environment. And when you do that, that's really cool because you can use a bot to then augment the existing conversation that's going on. So we could have one of those hooked up to our meeting chat. We could have one of those hooked up to a channel, the conversations tab or post tab or whatever it's called these days in a channel. We can also do the same thing inside of a group chat. Now, one of the things you can do that's really cool with this, these are just different building blocks. And unlike a lot of stuff we have in like the SharePoint framework, where we can't really like chain these different extensibility components together, in Teams, you usually chain a lot of this stuff together to create a bigger solution. And so one of the ways you could do that is, let's just say like I'm in a conversation tab and I'm having a conversation with multiple people. I can say something to the bot, but the bot needs to collect more information from me, and it doesn't need to do that in the context of the entire channel where it's going to where everyone else is going to see it and potentially confuse the bot. I'm like, well, hold on, Andrew was talking to me. It's not like his house where all of a sudden one of the kids jumps in and starts jumping in the conversation. So what this allows you to do is that the bot can respond back to Teams and tell Teams, hey, launch a task module, a dialogue, that's only Andrew is going to see. And so I can collect some information from Andrew and then drop out of that one-on-one kind of thread, kind of breakout session. And then we can go in and continue the conversation in the bigger chat there. So that's kind of cool because, hey, I'm want to go through and talk to somebody about a customer issue that we've got, and I can go fetch some customer information by the bot prompting me for that. The next example that we have, or the next component that we have, if you can advance the slide for me.
Yep, doing that.
Quick, is one called a messaging. This is called a messaging extension. This is very much like a bot. Now, what this does is it allows you to do one of 2 things. You can either execute a search or you can execute an action. So the search one is the easiest one to kind of understand first. All these things are really intended to do is really just augment an existing or a new conversation that you're going to start. a new post to a conversation that you're involved in. So if I want to do a search, those buttons you see at the very bottom, I click on one of those. If you've ever used the Giphy add-in or the Giphy feature that we have inside of Teams, this is a messaging extension. So what I do is I click a little button, it pops open a little dialogue. I tell it that I'm looking for the, I don't know, I'm looking for an image. Yeah, I'm looking for an image. I'm trying to think of one that's like safe for work because I'm being recorded. And of course my mind went blank because everything is filled with everything else. So I'm looking for a particular animated GIF. So I'm going to go search for that. It's going to give me a list of ones I could choose from, either as a list or as tiles like thumbnails. And when I pick it, it adds it to a new message, but it doesn't send it. It allows me to go add other stuff. And you've seen that with Giphy. You've seen it probably with like GitHub or with like Azure DevOps, where when I paste a link in, it can look at the content that's in that link. And if it matches a particular pattern, it's going to trigger a web service. Under the covers, it's really just a bot, but it's going to trigger that to go grab some other information and add that to my message. Now I can trigger that search from the compose box, which is number 1 at the bottom. The other type of extensions that I can create are ones called actions, action extensions. And what the action does, that can be launched from the command box at the top, number 3, or it can be launched from the more actions menu, number 2. Now this is kind of cool because this is bypassing the search piece and just saying, I need to go have this thing run and maybe do something. So for example, let's say in the one that we're looking at here, thankfully the text is a little blurry, so you can't really see what I'm going to tell you because the text doesn't show this. I'm just making it up as I go. But let's say a customer name or a customer ID was inside of that thread that person was saying. I can go to the more actions, say find the customer, and what it does is it will take the entire message, just that one message, not the whole conversation, but the one message. It will send it to my bot. My bot can then look at that message, find a customer ID, go over to Salesforce or Dynamics CRM or wherever I'm using, fetch information about that customer, mesh it into an adaptive card, and add that to a new message that's going to show up in the compose box that I can then add my other stuff to and hit send. So it allows me to really easily go through and to augment my existing conversations. That's all a messaging extension is. So those are
and what's really great about those adaptive cards is they can have actions on them too. So like if you're saying, if you want to say to somebody, hey, we're working, hey, I don't remember that customer that had this problem. Oh, that was Acme Company. And you can look up Acme Company for them, put it in the chat, and maybe that card then has like a go visit our custom solution that is for, or Salesforce or whatever it might be, some external system or some action that you want to even take, like submit a ticket for this customer or whatever it might be. So really super powerful interactivity can be built there.
It's really cool because what you can then go with that, once the bot created the message or responded with a message, the bot has full access to the message, including when you submit the action from the card, the bot can respond and say, hey, update that existing card with a new one. So you can actually have one message that's kind of showing a wizard-based experience in a one-on-one experience instead of launching the task module. So these are just 4 of the different things that you can use inside of Teams to put them together to create a full cohesive story on a custom app.
Awesome sauce. All right, let us take a little bit of a step back and just, Stefan, give us some of your sort of design considerations that everybody should think about if they're going to extend the platform.
Yeah, first, thank you, Julie. First of it, whenever you do something, some customizations to SharePoint Teams and whatever we have seen from the other people, is the first thing that is most important is the accessibility of this application. How can I make it as useful and as good for all my employees, even if they have disabilities or not? During the pandemic, I got my glasses. I see most of the stuff blurry. I increased my text size to be bigger than it normally was. So this all falls into accessibility. Make sure that the contrast of the colors in a correct have a correct ratio and something like that. Another thing that you should consider whenever you do an extensibility of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem is the context, in which context I'm in. So while it is good to have full experience and with all the features and all the bells and whistles on a desktop SharePoint page, you have to think about when I integrate this application into my Teams client, do I use it mostly when I'm on traveling, and do I really need to have the full feature set there, or can I trim it down so to make it more useful on a mobile device when I'm traveling around, while having the full experience then on my desktop Teams client in this sense? And another tip that I can give you is from a branding perspective. So what most company does with their company applications or company customizations, they assign the branding to them so that the user, the employees already know that this is an application that's not coming from Microsoft. This is an application that comes from our company and serves our purpose and our needs. This could be done in two ways. Either you directly apply the theme that you have on the SharePoint side anyways, or you create a dedicated theme for your application that you then use throughout all the ecosystem, which might we said we're developers taking over, but this branding story can also lead into the Power Platform to have their consistent experience, and not every application looks completely different. Yeah. And another thing is that or tip that I can give you for the user experience design. So documentation is key. What we do nowadays, we document first everything in HTML and CSS only before we build it in SharePoint. So we get directly in the browser feedback from customers and see how it will look like when it really runs in the browser. That's pretty cheap, simple. So we mock the data up, but we do it in browser. Another thing, what the documentation also could be, is just make screenshots of your applications, store it in a centralized document library there, because it helps you to solve problems in future. And you might have already thought about a usage scenario that is similar to something else. Then you have a dedicated location where you can go and say, hey, what applications do we have built? And this is really low level. Just take a screenshot of your Power application, Power Apps, and put it in there so that you just have, and maybe assign some keywords and description to it so that you have something to look up. And one thing which is the core of my work when I design something is the 10 Principles of Good Design by Dieter Rams. He is originally an industrial designer who built for Brown radios and all that stuff. And this was really an influential designer. And a while ago, he formulated the 10 Principles of Good Design. I also have those linked here.
Awesome.
Things in there like are, for example, good design is innovative, but good design, for example, is long lasting. So you want to have your application around and for a longer time than just redesign it every 2 or 3 years. So be thoughtful on how your design looks like to solve your problems. That's a really good point.
That is a really good point. Cool. So we have some resources for everybody. Our good friend Bob German, who was going to join us today, couldn't, and I wanted to share that he has a couple of Microsoft Build sessions, 2 of them in person. One of them is going to be recorded later though and shown later, but he has a couple of build sessions if you or some of your colleagues are interested in Teams building. Also, a link to the adaptive card extension gallery where you can kind of see some of the cool designs that can be done with ACES. A link to the extensibility library that Stefan and I built called H2O. It's the Microsoft Fluent design system, but built in a very reusable way with pure HTML and CSS implementations plus a React library. You can find Stefan Bauer at n8d8.at, and his Twitter handle is Steph Bauer. Andrew Connell, our esteemed colleague as well, he is Voitanos. You can find more information about his SharePoint framework and other training materials by going to Voitanos, and you can find him on Twitter at Andrew Connell. That is all for today, but join us again May 3rd. We're going to talk about building a sustainable information architecture with benefits as the use case. We are live as well. The Microsoft Collab conference in Vegas, I'm there. TechRama is Todd. He's going to be over there. European Collaboration Summit is going to be Todd, Derek, Mark, and I. Thrive is Emily and Mark. And then the 365 EduCon conference in DC is going to be Mark, Derek, Emily, Julie, AC, and oh, that's right, Stefan and I are going to be doing a joint session when design and development get together at the Microsoft Collaboration Conference in Vegas. We would love to see you there. And if you have developers in your life or you are a developer, please join Andrew Connell and I in checking out our Cloud Dev Clarity online webinar-y, podcasty thingy done with a video. And so that is all we have to today. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we will see you next time.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask in Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues. Join us again as we release new content every other Wednesday.